My friends, let me begin with a question. What does it mean when the most powerful military in the Middle East, backed by billions in US aid and the most advanced fighter jets money can buy, sees one of its most decorated pilots shot down and captured by a resistance movement in Yemen? That is not just a battlefield incident. That is a political earthquake. The moment this pilot, among the most prominent figures in the Israeli Air Force, was captured, the mask of invincibility shattered. For years, Israel has told the world that its military power is untouchable, its pilots the best trained, its skies impenetrable. And yet, over Yemen, in a region where people have been bombarded and starved but not broken, that narrative collapsed in the wreckage of a jet falling from the sky. Now, let us be clear. This is not simply about one pilot, one aircraft, or one confrontation. This is about the balance of power shifting before our very eyes. The capture of this man, immediately transferred for investigation by Yemeni forces, sends a message that no propaganda machine can drown out. It tells the oppressed across the globe, resistance is not only possible, it is effective. And it tells those who rely on domination and occupation, your power has limits and your arrogance will meet resistance. Think about the symbolism here. For decades, the Israeli Air Force has been the sharpest spear of its military might, feared across the Middle East. But when the pilot of such a force finds himself as a prisoner in enemy hands, that fear begins to dissolve. People in Palestine, Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, and far beyond are watching this moment closely. They are not just seeing a military setback for Israel, they are seeing a victory for dignity, for survival, and for the belief that the so-called underdog can, in fact, bring the giant to its knees. And yet, the mainstream media in the West will not tell you this. They will frame it as a tragic accident, as an unfortunate incident, minimizing the gravity of what just happened. Why? Because they cannot afford to admit that decades of investment, training, and weaponry are not producing the invincibility they promised. They cannot admit that people with far less wealth, far less technology, but far more determination can and will stand up successfully. We must ask ourselves, if a resistance movement can bring down the elite pilot of Israel, what else can they achieve? And what happens when more oppressed nations draw inspiration from this? These are not isolated sparks. They are flames spreading across the region, flames that occupation cannot extinguish. The downing of Israel's most prominent fighter jet and the capture of its elite pilot is not just an isolated incident on the battlefield, it is the unraveling of a carefully constructed myth, a myth that has long served as both a political weapon and a psychological shield for the Israeli state. For decades, Israel has projected its air force as the embodiment of superiority, technologically, strategically, and tactically unmatched in the region. Its pilots have been celebrated as the sharp edge of power, trained with the most advanced techniques, flying some of the most sophisticated machines on Earth, and reinforced by decades of support from Washington. Yet in a single moment, in the skies over Yemen, this image cracked, and with it, the illusion of invincibility began to collapse. Think about how power works. It is not just measured in weapons, bombs, or dollars. It is measured in perception. The perception that one side is untouchable discourages challengers. It saps the will of the oppressed, and it creates an aura that convinces even allies to fall in line. Israel's Air Force has been at the center of this perception for generations. The idea that its pilots cannot be beaten, that its technology is too advanced, that its skies cannot be penetrated. This has been repeated so often that it became accepted as fact. But facts have a way of being tested in reality, and when that jet was hit, when the wreckage fell, and when that pilot was taken alive, perception collided with truth. And the truth is this: no military power is beyond defeat, no matter how sophisticated or celebrated it may be. This is why the incident strikes far deeper than a single confrontation. It strikes at the core of psychological warfare. Israel's military strength has always rested on a dual foundation: raw power and the belief that resistance is futile. By capturing not just any pilot, but one of the most prominent figures in the Israeli Air Force, Yemen did more than score a tactical victory. It dismantled the aura of invincibility brick by brick. The shockwaves are not only being felt in Tel Aviv, but in capitals across the Middle East. Resistance groups in Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, and Palestine are watching and learning. They are asking themselves if Yemen, battered by years of war, blockade, and famine, can bring down the pride of Israel's air force, then what else is possible? And when that question spreads, when that idea takes root, it is more dangerous to Israel than any missile or rocket. Consider the narrative power of this moment. In every conflict, stories are as powerful as weapons. Israel's story has been one of dominance, precision, and control of the skies. Yemen has just rewritten that story. Instead of invincible pilots soaring untouchable, the world now sees a captured officer sitting under interrogation by those he once believed were beneath his notice. Instead of jets striking freely at will, the image now is of wreckage smoldering in the desert. These images matter because they travel faster than any bullet, and they carve themselves into the minds of millions who are searching for hope. The significance also lies in timing. Israel is already entangled in multiple fronts: Palestine, Lebanon, Syria, and its dependence on U.S. and Western support is at historic highs. To lose a pilot of this stature to a nation it has underestimated is not just embarrassing, it is destabilizing. Military strategists in Tel Aviv are asking how this could happen. Intelligence officers are scrambling to assess what information might be extracted, and political leaders are forced to explain how their air superiority has suddenly been compromised. These are not technical questions, they are existential ones. And so, the myth of invincibility is breaking down. Once a myth is broken, it cannot be easily rebuilt. Every future sortie by Israeli pilots will now carry the shadow of this incident. Every time a jet takes off, there will be whispers, will it return? Every pilot knows that the aura of superiority is as much a shield as the metal of their aircraft, and when that shield is gone, doubt creeps in, doubt erodes confidence, and confidence is the invisible armor every empire needs. So let us ask, what does it mean when the most celebrated symbol of Israel's military might is humbled by those who were never supposed to stand a chance? It means that history is not written only by the powerful. It means that myths are fragile. It means that the oppressed, no matter how small or battered, can expose the vulnerabilities of even the most celebrated armies. And it means that the illusion of invincibility, once broken, gives way to a far more dangerous truth, the truth that resistance can win. The events unfolding in Yemen with the downing of an Israeli fighter jet and the capture of one of its most prominent pilots represent more than a military exchange. They represent a dramatic shift in regional power dynamics. For years, the Middle East has been defined by an imbalance. Nations with immense technological superiority, backed by global powers imposing their will on weaker states struggling under blockades, sanctions, and decades of destruction. Yet, in that very imbalance lies the seed of transformation. Yemen, a country that has endured relentless airstrikes, hunger, and isolation, has now demonstrated an ability to alter the balance of power in ways that no analyst in Tel Aviv or Washington would have predicted. This moment is not just about a jet in flames, it is about the shifting tides of regional influence and the dangerous vulnerability of a status quo that many assumed was unshakable. Ask yourself, how does a nation that has been relentlessly bombarded for years, denied resources, denied even the most basic humanitarian supplies, manage to bring down one of the most advanced aircraft in the Middle East? The answer lies not in sheer firepower, but in strategy, determination, and adaptation. The capture of this pilot proves that military power is not a one-way street. It is not always the strongest who prevails. It is often the one who learns how to turn weakness into an unconventional strength. Yemen's resistance has done precisely that. They have turned scarcity into ingenuity, suffering into motivation, and oppression into a unifying force that can strike back against the most sophisticated war machines. This is why the moment reverberates far beyond Yemen's borders. Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, and Palestine are watching with sharp attention, and so are nations like Iran and even Turkey. The lesson is clear: advanced technology is not the final word in modern conflict. Drones, missiles, and highly trained pilots are formidable, but they are not invulnerable. When a smaller, resource-starved country can score such a victory against Israel, it changes the calculus for everyone. Regional players who once saw Israel's dominance as absolute may begin to reconsider their strategies. The balance of power is no longer locked in place, it is shifting, unstable, and open to challenge. Consider the psychological dimension. Israel's military machine has been presented for decades as a tool of deterrence, a warning to its neighbors that any act of defiance will be crushed swiftly and decisively. That deterrence relies on fear, fear of overwhelming retaliation, fear of consequences too great to bear. But fear collapses the moment courage finds proof that the oppressor can bleed. With one pilot captured, the aura of Israeli deterrence is pierced. The moment such a precedent is set, other nations and resistance groups begin to calculate differently. Suddenly, what was unthinkable becomes plausible, and what was once considered suicidal begins to look like an opportunity. And let us not forget the global dimensions of this shift. Western powers, particularly the United States, have tied their credibility to Israel's military strength. Billions of dollars flow annually to ensure that Israel remains the dominant force in the region. But if Yemen, under blockade, can challenge that dominance, then questions will arise not only in the Middle East, but in Washington and Brussels as well. How effective are these alliances? How reliable is this so-called invincibility? The capture of one pilot may seem like a small detail in the grand scheme, but in political and military psychology, it carries the weight of a seismic tremor. What happens next will be decisive. Israel cannot afford to appear weak, and yet every attempt to restore its image through retaliation risks exposing further vulnerabilities. Yemen, by demonstrating its capacity to fight back, has positioned itself not as a victim, but as an actor shaping the battlefield. And with every shift in perception, alliances are tested, narratives are rewritten, and the balance of power begins to tip. So here is the hook we cannot ignore. If Yemen can shift the dynamics of power with one bold act, what happens when others in the region follow suit? What happens when years of oppression turn into coordinated defiance? When those who were supposed to remain silent discover their collective strength? This is the danger that Tel Aviv and its allies fear most, and this is the hope that oppressed nations across the Middle East are beginning to see. Power is not fixed, it is fluid, and at this moment, it is shifting before our very eyes. The capture of the most prominent Israeli Air Force pilot did not end when his jet crashed to the ground. In many ways, it began the moment Yemeni forces secured him and swiftly transferred him for investigation. This immediate move reveals not just efficiency, but the deliberate calculation of a resistance force that understands the weight of what they hold in their hands. For Israel, the downing of a jet is damaging enough, but the capture of a pilot, alive, intact, and subject to interrogation, creates an entirely new set of pressures that ripple outward from the battlefield into the political, military, and diplomatic arenas. What matters here is not only that a pilot was taken, but how quickly and effectively Yemeni forces acted to transform this battlefield victory into a political weapon. The swiftness of the transfer tells us that Yemen had prepared for this possibility. It suggests that the resistance movement was not merely reacting to circumstances, but anticipating them, ready with systems in place to secure and protect such a high-value individual. This speaks volumes about the evolution of Yemen's military strategy. For years, critics dismissed Yemen's armed groups as disorganized or incapable of handling complex operations. But this incident shows not only precision in execution but foresight in planning. By moving the captured pilot immediately into secure custody, they ensured that the value of this capture could be maximized through intelligence gathering, political leverage, and the psychological blow it delivers to Israel. Interrogation of such a figure carries consequences that extend far beyond tactical insights. This is no ordinary soldier. This is a prominent pilot, someone deeply trusted within the Israeli Air Force, trained in advanced operations, and likely exposed to sensitive information about missions, strategies, and protocols. Even partial intelligence gathered from him could prove invaluable to resistance movements and their allies. But perhaps more significant than intelligence is the leverage. A captured pilot of this stature becomes a bargaining chip, a symbol, and a tool of negotiation. He represents an opportunity to force Israel into a dilemma, escalate and risk further humiliation, or negotiate and reveal a vulnerability Israel has long denied. For the people of Yemen, the swiftness of this transfer also serves as a powerful statement of sovereignty and capability. It sends a clear message: we are not disorganized, we are not powerless, and we are not passive victims of your aggression. Instead, they are actors in control of their battlefield, able not only to strike but to protect and secure the fruits of their victories. This moment becomes propaganda of the most effective kind, not because it is manufactured, but because it is undeniable. Images and reports of the pilot's capture and transfer cannot be erased, and they reinforce the perception that Israel is not beyond reach. For Israel, however, the nightmare is only beginning. Every hour that this pilot remains in Yemeni hands raises questions back home. What is he revealing? What will come to light? How will this be used against Israel in the court of global opinion? And even more deeply, how does Israel maintain its image of control when one of its most prized assets is under the control of those it sought to dominate? The Israeli public, accustomed to being told their military is untouchable, now faces the uncomfortable reality that their own heroes can be paraded as captives. There is also the psychological torment of the unknown, unlike the death of a soldier, where closure, however painful, can be achieved. The captivity of a pilot drags uncertainty into the lives of both military leadership and citizens alike. Will he be exchanged? Will he appear in propaganda videos? Will his words, under interrogation, be broadcast to the world? Each possibility chips away at the carefully maintained narrative of Israeli dominance. And here lies the hook that should not be missed: a single man in captivity has the power to destabilize the political equilibrium of an entire region. His presence in Yemeni hands is not simply about extracting intelligence, it is about amplifying the voice of a resistance that refuses to be silenced. It is about demonstrating that every jet that takes off may return not in triumph but in disgrace. It is about reminding both Israel and the world that military might cannot erase the determination of those who fight with purpose, patience, and strategy. So when Yemen moved that pilot immediately into custody, they were doing more than securing a prisoner, they were securing a narrative, one that now belongs not to Israel but to them. And the question now reverberating across the region is simple yet haunting: if Yemen can capture the pride of Israel's air force and turn him into a symbol of resistance, what else might they be prepared to capture next? The psychological and political impact of the captured Israeli pilot extends far beyond the battlefield and into the very core of Israel's identity as a military power. When an elite pilot is not only shot down but also taken alive, the shock reverberates in ways that statistics, casualty reports, or destroyed equipment never could. This is not merely a matter of hardware lost, it is a matter of pride, of reputation, of the image that Israel has projected for decades. For the people of Israel, accustomed to seeing their Air Force as the untouchable guardians of the nation, this moment strikes at confidence. For its adversaries across the region, it ignites hope, courage, and the belief that the so-called unshakable pillars of Israeli power can indeed be shaken. Wars are fought not only with bullets and bombs, but with images and stories. The image of a downed jet and a captured pilot dismantles the aura of supremacy Israel has cultivated. For years, Israeli leaders have relied on deterrence, the idea that their enemies would not dare cross certain lines for fear of devastating consequences. But deterrence rests on perception, and perception is fragile. One event, one successful strike, one captured officer can unravel years of careful image building. The psychological effect is immense. Israeli soldiers and pilots now know that even the best among them can fall, while resistance fighters see living proof that the enemy bleeds and breaks like anyone else. Inside Israel, the political establishment faces its own turmoil. Leaders must answer the difficult questions: how did one of the nation's top pilots fall into enemy hands? What does this mean for the security of future missions? How will families trust that their sons and daughters in uniform are protected when even the best trained pilot was vulnerable? This breeds doubt, and doubt corrodes the political legitimacy of those in power. Citizens demand strength, reassurance, and a restoration of pride, but leaders struggle when the facts themselves contradict the message of invincibility. For Israel's enemies, this moment is electrifying. Across the Middle East, resistance groups in Lebanon, Gaza, Syria, and Iraq watch closely, taking notes, drawing inspiration. They see the capture not just as a victory for Yemen, but as a victory for all who resist domination. This is where the political effect expands. It emboldens movements that might otherwise have felt cornered or weak. The message is simple but powerful. Resistance can succeed, no matter the odds, and when that message spreads, it becomes a force multiplier more potent than any single missile or drone strike. But there is another layer to this impact: the international stage. Western powers, especially the United States, have invested heavily in portraying Israel as a model of military strength and stability in the Middle East. If a small, impoverished nation like Yemen can capture one of Israel's most elite soldiers, then what does that say about the billions poured into Israeli defense systems? This moment forces uncomfortable questions in Washington and European capitals, where policymakers must reconcile their investments with the growing evidence that Israel is not the unshakable force they have marketed it to be. The political consequences of this perception shift may not be immediate, but they are real, and they erode Israel's ability to command unquestioned support. Psychologically, the incident also unsettles Israel's own military ranks. Pilots, once revered as heroes operating under the assumption of superiority, must now grapple with the possibility of capture. That fear creeps into training, into missions, into the very culture of the Air Force. Every time a pilot straps into a cockpit, the image of their colleague in enemy hands lingers in the background. Doubt takes root, and when doubt replaces certainty, performance suffers. Here is the hook: it is not the jet that matters most, nor even the intelligence that may be extracted from the captured pilot. What matters most is the shift in belief: the belief of Israelis in their own strength, the belief of their enemies in their own potential, and the belief of the world in Israel's permanence as a dominant power. Belief is the invisible battlefield where wars are often won or lost, and in that battlefield, Yemen has scored a victory larger than the downing of a single plane. So the psychological and political impact of this event is not confined to the present moment. It is a ripple that spreads outward, changing how people see themselves, their enemies, and the balance of power in the region. And the lingering question, the one that keeps generals awake at night and fuels the hope of resistance fighters, is this: if Israel's strongest can fall, what else can fall with them? When the story of the captured Israeli pilot broke, the reaction of Western media was predictable yet telling. Instead of treating it as the seismic event it truly was, headlines softened the language, framing it as an incident or an unfortunate event, carefully stripping away the weight of its symbolism. This is not an accident, it is part of the broader political theater of information control. Western outlets, closely aligned with the narratives of their governments, understand that acknowledging the full magnitude of this capture would shatter the image they have worked tirelessly to maintain: that Israel's military power is beyond challenge, and that resistance movements are nothing more than irritants destined to be crushed. By downplaying the story, they attempt to contain the psychological damage. But containment is not the same as prevention, and in this case, the symbolism of the event has already broken free of their framing. What matters here is not just what the media says, but what the media avoids saying. They will highlight the human side of the captured pilot, portraying him as a victim, a father, a patriot, anything to distract from the deeper reality that Israel's so-called untouchable Air Force has been pierced. They will avoid discussing how this capture destabilizes Israel's aura of deterrence. They will gloss over how this moment fuels the morale of resistance groups across the region. They will not admit that this is a historic precedent, one that redefines the boundaries of what is possible in a conflict long thought to be one-sided. Yet no matter how much the story is sanitized, the symbolism leaks out. Images, videos, and reports spread across social media, bypassing official channels, carrying the unfiltered message Israel is not invincible. And here lies the paradox. The more the media attempts to downplay the event, the more people suspect its significance. Silence, after all, speaks loudly when the subject is so glaring. Why not give full coverage to what should be a major international event? Why not analyze the implications openly? The absence of serious debate itself becomes evidence of the importance of the story. For people in the region, this fuels a sense of validation. The truth is too dangerous to be told, therefore it must be powerful. This creates a ripple effect of belief that spreads faster than any news broadcast. The global perception of this event divides sharply along political lines. In Western capitals, the effort is to shield Israel from embarrassment and to preserve the image of control. In the Middle East, however, the capture is being celebrated as a turning point, a living reminder that resistance is not only alive but capable of victories with global resonance. In the global South, too, nations that have historically faced Western domination see in Yemen's success a reflection of their own struggles. They interpret it as a symbol of defiance against overwhelming odds, a story that resonates with anyone who has lived under the shadow of foreign power. This is why the symbolism cannot be contained. It crosses borders, cultures, and political divides, embedding itself in the global imagination. Israel, for its part, faces a political nightmare. It must simultaneously downplay the capture to prevent emboldening its enemies, while also reassuring its own citizens that nothing has been lost. Yet the very act of reassurance betrays the fact that something has indeed been lost: confidence. The military establishment cannot undo the images of a captured pilot, nor can it erase the whispers that follow. If one can be taken, why not another? If one jet can fall, why not more? And if Israel can be humiliated, perhaps its dominance is not as unshakable as once believed. The hook is clear: the capture of this pilot is not just an operational setback, it is a narrative rupture. Narratives are what sustain empires, what justify interventions, what reassure populations at home and intimidate adversaries abroad. When that narrative cracks, no amount of media spin can fully repair it. The more the media tries to minimize, the more people recognize that something monumental has happened. The attempt to obscure the truth only amplifies its power, because truth, once glimpsed, cannot be unseen. So the question lingers in the minds of millions: if this story is being muted so deliberately, what are they afraid we will realize? And the answer, unspoken but increasingly obvious, is that we are witnessing not just a captured pilot, but a captured myth, a myth that once seemed unbreakable but now lies in the custody of those who were never supposed to win. The capture of Israel's most prominent pilot is more than a tactical victory. It is a historical moment that exposes the fragility of empires and the inevitability of change. For decades, Israel has positioned itself as the region's supreme military power, backed by the latest technology, limitless Western funding, and an aura of superiority. Its air force, in particular, has been mythologized as the untouchable sword of the nation, capable of striking anywhere, anytime, with unmatched precision. And yet, history has a way of humbling those who believe themselves beyond reach. The sight of a downed jet and a captured pilot is not just a blow to Israel's military, it is a reminder that no empire, no matter how mighty, escapes the tides of history. Look back through time and you will see this pattern repeat. Superpowers rise on the back of military dominance, but overconfidence always plants the seeds of vulnerability. The British Empire once claimed the sun would never set on its territories until it did. The United States has waged war after war with unmatched firepower, only to discover in places like Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan that sheer might cannot extinguish determined resistance. Israel, too, has leaned heavily on the idea that advanced technology ensures victory. But Yemen's success has pierced that illusion, reminding us that determination, strategy, and resilience can equalize even the most uneven of playing fields. This is why the capture feels like more than an isolated incident. It carries the weight of a turning point, a crack in the armor of a power that once appeared unshakable. What makes this moment historic is not simply that it happened, but that it happened in Yemen, a nation portrayed for years as impoverished, broken, and incapable of standing against foreign powers. Yemen was supposed to be a cautionary tale of what happens when a people defy the established order, endless suffering under bombs and blockades. Yet instead of collapsing, the Yemeni people adapted, resisted, and eventually struck back in a way no one expected. This reversal is symbolic in the deepest sense. It tells the world that history is not always written by the powerful, it is written by those who refuse to accept subjugation, no matter the odds. That is why the capture is not just about Yemen and Israel, it is about the universal struggle of the oppressed to assert their dignity. Politically, the moment echoes far beyond the Middle East. Leaders across the global South see in this event an allegory for their own circumstances. They see proof that dependency on Western backed powers is not eternal, that narratives of invincibility can collapse overnight. For the first time in years, a resistance movement has achieved something with symbolic power equal to, if not greater than, any battlefield victory. And symbolism, when it enters the bloodstream of global consciousness, is unstoppable. It cannot be bombed away, it cannot be censored out of existence. It spreads in whispers, in headlines, in images shared across borders, feeding a sense of possibility that once seemed unimaginable. Inside Israel, meanwhile, this is a political earthquake. The capture forces leaders to confront a nightmare scenario. The myth of deterrence, the backbone of Israeli defense policy, has been punctured. For decades, deterrence kept adversaries at bay by instilling fear of overwhelming retaliation. But deterrence is psychological, not mechanical, and psychology cracks when people see proof that fear can be overcome. Once one nation achieves the impossible, others begin to calculate differently. If Yemen can do this, what might Lebanon attempt? What might Palestine believe is within reach? Each new possibility grows from the soil of this single precedent. And here is the hook: moments like these do not remain confined to the day they occur. They echo forward into the future, shaping decisions, inspiring movements, altering the trajectory of conflicts. This pilot, sitting in captivity, represents far more than himself. He is the embodiment of a myth undone, a myth that held entire nations in check for decades. His capture signals that history has turned a corner, that the balance of power is not fixed, and that the unthinkable is, in fact, possible. So, when we speak of this as a historical turning point, we are not exaggerating. We are acknowledging that history often shifts in moments that appear small on the surface, but carry profound symbolic weight. The question now is not whether Israel can recover militarily, it can and will retaliate, but whether it can recover the myth of invincibility that once shielded it. Because when myths die, empires tremble, and when empires tremble, history accelerates. This moment is exactly that: the acceleration of history unfolding in real time in the skies over Yemen. Let me close with this. History is filled with moments when the seemingly impossible becomes reality. When empires, certain of their eternal dominance, are humbled by those they once dismissed as powerless. The downing of this jet and the capture of its pilot is one of those moments. It should remind us all that no system of oppression, no matter how armed, how wealthy, or how arrogant, is safe from the will of people who refuse to bow. So the question I leave with you is this: if one pilot falling from the sky can shake the image of Israeli invincibility, what might happen when the oppressed join hands, when resistance becomes unity, and when dignity outweighs fear? That, my friends, is where history is headed, and the world is watching.